Welcome to Insist on Truth, and thank you for joining us this evening. We're honored to once again compare notes with SGAnon. His audio files continue to provide timely updates and observations of the situations here in the U.S. and beyond. Tonight, we're going to explore a particular theme. In the past couple of years, a number of sources have spoken of the role of symbolism in the fight in which we find ourselves. Tonight, we'll take a look at some of the symbols that have been observed, and with SG's help, try to provide some potential insight into why symbolism is important to note and perhaps even more important to understand. Some of the situations we'll discuss include notable personalities and celebrities. We're not alleging anything against these individuals, simply noting the common behaviors and perhaps forming some theories about their meanings. Some of the concepts may seem controversial, but we encourage everyone to take in the information, do your research, and form your own conclusions. After our discussion with SGAnon, we'll have some short videos that give more examples of these symbolic images and gestures in a number of situations. Now, here's our discussion with SGAnon. All right, thank you for joining Insist on Truth. This evening, we're joined again by SGAnon. And SG, thank you so much for making time for us.
Thanks for having me back, Mr. Quinn. It's good to be here.
So tonight we're going to delve into an area that within the Q post has been called out a number of times, symbolism. And the fact that it exists, the fact that we can learn from it and spot it, and hopefully we'll be able to learn what some of these are and the way that they fit with we'll call it for the moment the forces that we're battling at the moment. How's that sound, SG? Is that all right?
Excellent, my friend. Good discussion.
Okay. So symbols kind of came on the focus back in the mid-2000s when the FBI released a set of figures that were associated with pedophilia. And for many people, this was their first exposure to, gosh, there's things out there in the world that mean things, and they're supposed to be kind of hidden. And as a reminder, things that, many folks call occult. Occult is really just another name for something that's hidden. So these were brought out and fairly quickly got recognized as, as symbols for those who were interested in or in fact practicing pedophilia. I think your knowledge goes back at least this far and farther from our previous discussion. Yes, SG?
Indeed, my friend. The symbolism is a powerful issue. These people put it on everything that they've ever built, right? It's all over the Israeli Knesset. It's all over Buckingham Palace. It's all over Company's House in London. There's plenty of symbolism in Washington, D.C. There's lots of, there's pedophilic symbolism on the NIH building, right? The 666, the 366, the sixes. So the issue of symbolism, and if I'm correct to understand, the direction of the conversation today is more about what is symbolism and why do they use it, and just how real is it? How reliable is this when we're looking at trying to understand the reality of the different layers going on in our world? And I would conjecture with anybody out there that the reliability is sort of based in how devoutly these people believe in it. They have used it for hundreds and hundreds of years. It is a powerful message of coded, or a powerful form of coded messaging. It's no different than, the story that was outed by Instagram regarding pizza, right? And MAP being used as pedophilic code words. And of course, MAP on Twitter became very well known for, an acronym for minor attracted persons, which is a pedophile, right? So the coded messaging is part of how these people have hidden themselves in plain sight. Symbolism is a massive component of that. It takes a while to digest, but once you've sort of gone through and evaluated the symbols and seen the different connections, every connection from that point forward that has that symbol is going to sort of call your attention to it. You can't unsee what you now know.
Right. And that's kind of the point for this evening's session, is to help people recognize these as they go forward. And the more instances that it occurs, to me, the more real it becomes, because it becomes difficult to explain why these things would occur in a given circumstance. Here's a couple examples of one of those particular symbols that the FBI released. It's in jewelry. It's in, this is a picture of de Blasio and his wife dancing in an event in New York City, and she's wearing a face mask with one of these symbols on it. It's just, the question gets difficult to answer. Why would you pick a face mask with those particular symbols on it? One of the things that began to crop up a few years ago that I personally find fascinating is a hand symbol that forms a triangle. And I think you may have referred to it as was it the rock symbol?
Indeed, rock, R-O-C, going back to the ancient Egyptian days, right? Rock sort of being the eye through which the sun god Ra saw the world. And so there's your reference phonetically, Ra, rock. And so, what it highlights, I think, Mr. Quinn, more than anything, and then I'll get back to the discussion here, what you were getting ready to put up on the screen, is that these practices go back a very long time. And one of the uniting factors behind all of the corruption in the world is, in fact, a religious-like practice and a religious-like zealotry that drives a tremendous amount of behavior.
Yep. And I think we'll get to explore that a little bit more as we go through this. So one of the first places that I recall seeing this crop up, and I think at the time I didn't even understand it, was a session that Jim Carrey, an appearance that Jim Carrey made on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, and did this.
Is that a gang sign? Have you,
Oh, like you don't know what it is. You don't know what that is.
I have no idea.
You don't know. Jimmy Fallon doesn't know. David Letterman doesn't know.
We don't know.
All the comics and show business don't know what this is. Right? Yeah.
What is it?
Come on, Jimmy. Seriously, the time is up. People are hip to this kind of stuff. I'm here tonight to blow the lid off it, to be the whistleblower. I'm sick and tired of the secrets and the lies. It is the secret symbol of the Illuminati, and you're a part of it, and it is the all-mocking tongue.
Oh, I like it.
I think it was my grandmother used to say, in every bit of comedy, there's a bit of truth. And so you listen to that and you're first struck with, well, he's just making a joke. But then you start looking around at the world again and you find out that there are a lot of people doing these funny moves. Pardon me. There we go. And you see it again and again and again and again. Now this, it happens to be a lot of celebrities but other notable people. And the question becomes, I don't remember ever making that hand sign. Why are they doing it?
This is, again, another example of that coded messaging, confirming your allegiance and loyalty to the club, essentially. When you get into things like Hollywood and you're a new celebrity, hot talent on the rise, right? Mm. And you end up at one of these really terrible parties, and whether by your own will and you're purposefully there and you're just that sick, or whether you're caught up in it and now you're blackmailed and controlled forever, part of your job from then on, if you wish to stay in the good graces of those that pull the levers of admission into things like high finance, the billionaires club, the A-list elite actors, right, and all of the agents and the producers that you sort of have to get in with in order to get a true place at the table, right? You have to sort of ingratiate yourself as you go forward, declaring your allegiance in a way that is what these people consider sort of karmically in balance. And I know that that's sort of a gaslighting word out there, especially for the evangelical community, but it's worth noting that these individuals believe that if they don't put it in your face, then it's not going to have some sort of spiritual or symbolic effect on their end. And so it's in a lot of our pop culture. It's in, what you just showed there with Mr. Carey. Paul McCartney is on video sitting down, to do an interview, I think with David Letterman actually, and flashes the Illuminati symbol very clearly and powerfully right as he sort of sits down at the table and adjusts his coat and his jacket. So these people put it out there because they have to show you, they have to tell you. They also have to show those who they serve, those who they sort of ingratiate themselves with and declare their allegiance and their loyalty. And so that becomes sort of a multi-angular production more than anything else, right? It's a real life thing that's occurring, but it is a sort of a cinematic production in a way. And that's one of the ways that they hide, right? Through that nonverbal affirmation of what side they're on, and who they're loyal to at the end of the day. I think is why when Q comes out and says things like symbolism is their downfall, it's because symbolism is their roadmap. Now we have a legend for the map. Now we can see them everywhere that they're doing this, right? We can get online and cross-reference the cinematic productions and the television shows and the different moments where people have been captured on camera doing these things, and figure out in a very sort of cohesive and coalescent way who is on that side and who is on the side of we the people.
Yeah. You mentioned the karmic sort of slant to this. What's your feeling or theory or findings about why do they believe that it helps karmically, the karma equation on their side, to display things for us to see?
It sort of gets into the idea of who they believe themselves to be and who mankind really is. And that's the context, I think, for the discussion if we're going to talk about why they do some of the things that they do. Mm-hmm. They believe themselves to be the literal spawns, the literal sons of some sort of a union in the days of old between Eve and the serpent. Whether for good or for ill, that's what they believe. And so they believe that in order to properly worship and adhere to, the recognition of that religious deity for them, that they have to invert everything that is of God, right? Invert everything that is of the Almighty and the Christ and the source of all creation, right? And so this is one of the ways, that they go about doing that. They stick something that is quite frankly, repulsive and awful, and is representative of a very sick and harmful practice. And they do it in such a fashion that we, the people, don't actually notice it, except that in our participation in their ritual. And again, this is not to say that I'm endorsing it. What I'm saying is this is what they believe. In our participation in their ritual, because we're watching their movies, or we're watching their Grammys, or we're continuing to go to their athletic events, right, or we're following them on these different social media and sort of giving them our adoration. They view that as them essentially glorifying their religious deity, which of course is Satan, who hates all of humanity. Now, you asked about the karmic issue. The karmic issue comes in the sense that nothing can violate free will in God's universe, right? And I know that's sort of a difficult statement to undertake, so let's unpack it a little bit. When we say that nothing can violate free will, that's the basis of sovereign law. That's the basis of individual identity and sovereignty in this world, right? You are a living soul. You live under a social compact that you agree about with your peers and with your fellow human beings, and you agree to espouse essentially what amounts to a 10 Commandments style law that builds up humanity and encourages one another to the highest good. It's all based on free will. It's all based on consent, right? They have to get our consent in order for their legal fiction, in order for their corporate fiction, in order for their financial fiction and government fiction and healthcare fiction and all of these different facades that they've created for society. They require our consent to participate in those systems. Else they believe that their deity, will be disempowered and will not be able to fulfill backing them, essentially, right? Backing the power of the occult magic that they believe themselves to be doing. And it's why they conduct very sick rituals and then talk about it with this sort of symbolism right here. So when we participate in the different things, when we give our life energy to that, our spiritual time, right? When we focus our mind and we get our heart all involved in a movie or, some sort of sporting event or some sort of celebrity worship of some kind, when there's that slightest bit of idolatry, then they consider us consenting to participation in a ritual that absolves them of any sort of repercussions coming their way, because they believe that they're sort of horking us in through the conduit of our own free will.
So that, to make sure I'm understanding, it's really incumbent on us to spot this and say no, rather than be ambivalent about it and say, well, it doesn't really mean anything. It may in fact mean quite a bit, and it's up to us to make sure that we recognize it, and where needed, we stand against certain things because we are being shown. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And if I may, to sort of close off this segment really quickly, when Jesus came out and he said, let your yes be yes and let your no be no. I firmly believe that the wisest man maybe who ever lived in all of human history, right? The Son of God himself, I firmly believe that he was saying it's not just about your words. It's about what you choose to give your God-given time and your God-given energy to. When you say yes to this task that you wish to undertake, make sure that you are saying yes in all of the fashions and layers. Don't halfway it, right? Whenever you see something before you that is repulsive or does not feed you spiritually, firmly say no. Firmly guard thy heart, for out of it flow all of the issues of life, right? And so when we look at things like this symbolism and we plainly see it, it's incumbent upon us to say, this is the moment of spiritual consent, at least according to them. That's what they believe. So this is where I'm going to say, no, I don't approve of that. I'm not going to bring it into my godly world. I'm not going to bring it into my relationship with the Almighty. And I'm certainly not going to bring it into my life because it doesn't feed me in any significant or beneficial way.
Yep. Let's take a look at one more picture here, which it literally popped into my one of my feeds earlier today, and I thought, oh my goodness, here's a picture, looks like it's back in the 40s or 50s of Einstein doing again the same thing. If folks are still out there saying, oh well, this is just a coincidence, you just happen to pick up 5 or 6 pictures of people doing this, let's play one more little video clip of the end of the Super Bowl halftime last year. So literally within the last, we're coming up to almost the anniversary in the next few months. So hopefully folks are getting the message that these things are actually being shown to us. We need to be aware of them so that we can take appropriate action or use our steps to combat them where necessary. So just fascinating. I think I'm really hoping people are understanding that this stuff occurs all the time. There's quite a number of these different symbols. We won't go through in depth all of them, but I did want to take a look at something that is called the six. Most people refer to it as the 6-eye symbol. And one disclaimer on all of this is, we're showing a lot of celebrities and notable people. We don't, in our setting, we don't pretend to know their intent and makeup, but the actions alone should send a message, and behaviors are telling in often cases. So we'll rely simply on what the symbols are for the moment. So SG, if you'll bear with me one more time, I want to show one more thing here, just for a moment. And what many people have pointed out, there's a wide variety of people that do this, both in magazines and videos and so forth. And it's often referred to as the 6-eye sign because it seems, if you look at the fingers and the curve, it seems to form 3 sixes. And again, goes back to perhaps a belief system that may be in place with these people. Okay. Okay. And then again, there's other symbols that often crop up in very interesting circumstances. We'll take a look at one more here in just a second. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's another type of hand sign. And again, it seems to get made in unusual places. Interestingly, one of the places that we saw it was on January 6th. And it occurred on the floor of Congress. And let's see that for just a minute. I'm going to replay that so you can actually see it from the very beginning. McConnell turns around. And it's almost blatantly put right in his face. And then he turns back around and goes back to business. And they ultimately, as we all know, voted to not observe the objections of a number of the states. So this isn't limited to celebrities. Clearly, this is more pervasive. And I think in the past you've referred to the depth of the corruption, whatever you want to call it, through various layers of government. Perhaps we could spend a few minutes and talk about that this is not just the typically isn't the upper echelon in all cases. This can be pervasive across many groups, and you really can't point to any one group that is central to this. Does that make sense?
Well, absolutely, because at least in our public facing arenas, right, the levers of power that we are familiar with and that we interact with in a mental and oftentimes physical way, those are all mules, right? Those are all individuals that serve much higher puppet masters. And it's only been within the last few years that the names like Rothschild or Hohenzollern or Bilderberg have become true household names on the tongues of a lot of people out there. There are many, many layers to the hegemony of control that was sort of heaped onto the world, primarily in the last 200 years. In America, you can go back to the Act of 1871, where we had, essentially what amounted to a financial usurpation of the Republic of the United States of America. And a legal fiction, a corporate facade was put in place of that, a business entity that was owned by Companies House in London and essentially serviced the British Crown. And so that symbol that you just highlighted, right, is a jewel, right? It's usually the diamond symbol or the jewel symbol. Excuse me, and it's designed to highlight adherence to the crown, adherence to the jewels, right, and the crown jewels of England and the monarchies of Europe, all of whom are interbred with one another. Excuse me, because it's all the same locus of control at the very top, the same big financial transnational groups, primarily billionaires and banking clans and dynasties, along with the bloodline families in Europe, a lot of whom, go back to the days of old. That is from where a lot of this has emanated out onto the world over the last really 250 to 300 years. You go back to Meyer, Amschel, Rothschild, which is a great piece of homework for everyone out there. And you can sort of trace out in linear time how the infiltration and the takeover of all of really what amounted to the finance of the Western world. And through that, the governments and the militaries of the Western world actually occurred. And so what you've got, what you just highlighted with Mr. McConnell, sort of similar to the coin handshake that occurred with Mike Pence on January 6th, when Mike Pence opted not to send things back to the states, which was perfectly constitutional for the president of the Senate or the vice president to take that step and just, remind the state electors, or the state legislatures, that they needed to make sure that their elector slates were good for account. And that process could have very easily been undertaken with, little to no trouble, but it was not. And of course, we know why. So these people send, instructions with one another. They remind one another of loyalties and allegiances and, quite frankly, blackmail. And so they're sort of forced into positions, right, where they are manipulated at the public facing level because they are protecting those above them who have them really by the short hairs to whatever degree.
Right. The coin given to Pence is actually very interesting. There's some many people just missed it. A gentleman walked up to the side of the top podium and reached up and placed it in Pence's hand. Do we know what the coin said or was by any chance? Or do we have a theory?
The working theory on it, from what I've seen with a couple of really good anon digs, is it's a coin that bears the insignia of the Knights Templar, which goes back to the Jesuit order. And as we know, Mike Pence and John Roberts were actually very closely connected with some CPS and adoption services criminality there in the Eastern Seaboard, the greater Washington, D.C. area. And John Roberts, up until very recently, was a devout Jesuit and actually a knighted Knight of Malta.
How interesting. I did not know that piece. That's wonderful. So we've talked about symbolism. I think we've sent the message that it is important to pay attention. After we get done our session at the final portion of the segment, when we do final production, we're going to include some other videos that show other types of symbolism so that folks can begin getting a sense of how to pay attention and notice it when it occurs. As we go forward, it seems as if some of the symbolism, some of the reliance on symbolism, for at least some people, is falling away. In other words, there's a greater propensity to actually show quite openly a connection to Satan and the dark side. One of those examples recently was the nomination of Marina Abramovic. I think I've got her name close to right. To be ambassador. Zelensky nominated her to be ambassador for for Ukraine. And yet here is a woman that that became notable when through WikiLeaks emails surfaced talking about spirit cooking, which is, we're not going to show it on the show this evening, but it is essentially stylized symbolic cannibalism as entertainment over dinner. It's bizarre. And Marina was confirming whether John Podesta could attend such an event. So pretty quickly she got on the radar because of that. And then since then, some of her associations have risen to get her in the news. Obviously concerns about children, as there are throughout all of this, children being the most innocent among us seem to be one of the most frequent targets. And they keep cropping up. But some of Marina's writings, actions, and so forth are just quite bizarre. Here she's pictured with Jacob Rothschild in front of a painting entitled "Satan Summoning His Legions." So again, pretty outwardly saying, this must be a reason why I want to be in a picture like this. What have you noticed this as well? And what do you think might be the next steps that we need to be paying attention to with this kind of stuff surfacing?
Well, as far as next steps, I think the next steps segment we should take first because it's pretty short. Marina is a well-known sort of worldwide, elitist level Luciferian priestess. That is what she markets herself as. She's participated in festivals and parties with Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She's coordinated with Lady Gaga and several other mega stars. I mean, like Katy Perry, just truly transnational celebrity models, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or singers or dancers or those sorts of things. And she markets herself as essentially a spiritual advisor in the occult, and that's exactly what she is, right? And so we've talked a long time with the issue in Ukraine and how a part of the deal that's happening in Ukraine pertains to, actually a major part is the biological terrorism, but another component is the fact that the Russian government and President Putin have been announcing to the world for 15 years that the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian countryside, has been coming across the southwest Russian border and kidnapping children. They have extremely high kidnapping rates out of these towns that are along the Ukrainian border. And Putin has been, sort of on the horn about it for a very long time, and nothing's ever been even acknowledged in the NATO West, which of course is no surprise. So the connection to Marina and the Ukrainian state, I think, is incredibly interesting because you have a lady here who, if you go and check out her history and the things that she herself has put out into the digital space with her Instagram and her Patreon account and different things like that, some of the imagery that you find is just absolutely horrifying. And it's very blatant and plain, the types of attitudes that these people have towards human beings in general, right? And what's notably sick about it is a lot of times those attitudes are directed at minors and very young children. Some really good homework for your viewers out there if they sort of want to understand more about Miss Abramovic and the type of rituals that she and others have conducted in the background for a long time. People need to look up the unsolved murder of the model Ryan Singleton. Ryan was actually at an event that Miss Abramovic had hosted and sort of was the main attraction. And that's all that I'll say on the matter. And people can go and sort of glean and divine for themselves how far down the rabbit hole they wish to go with that. But this is a lady who is connected to some extremely dark issues as it pertains to trafficking, as it pertains to protection of ritualistic criminality at the elitist level. And now she is being appointed to represent the Ukrainian nation to the rest of the world. That almost sort of sounds, cinematic in its bravado, if you will, but I think it sort of goes to paint a very clear picture. And speaking of pictures, the photograph taken in front of that painting came out, or that photograph was taken immediately prior to the coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic onto the rest of the world. So this is someone who is ingratiated with deep finance and deep elitist control of the world in a very significant way. And the connection is not to be underestimated.
Yep. That's, it is fascinating. And there's been other reports too that certain facets of this, we'll call it this other belief, if you will, this acceptance of Satanism and Luciferianism is exhibiting itself around even the U.S. There was a report just last week that a museum up in, I believe it was Minnesota, it might have been Ohio, but I believe it was Minnesota, had a family-friendly summon a demon exhibition. And they literally did something that they expected might summon a demon. And it was welcome and open for families, including kids. And I thought, my goodness, what in the heck is anybody thinking that is holding such an event? We got to be, we have to be cognizant of that. And as we see that continue to emerge, recognize it for exactly what it is. It's these people showing beliefs and trying to, I think, draw other people into an acceptance of those, perhaps being unawares that we're dealing with real things, right? Recently, and I'm going to transition more to what you've been showing because I find your work always fascinating. You published this picture of Hillary and apparently showing something to her, taking a picture with a little boy. How did this come up, and can you put a little context around your thinking here?
This picture was actually taken immediately after the Haitian earthquakes, and it sort of goes to highlight, and the reason I shared it onto Truth Social is it highlights just how sort of sick and sadistic these individuals really are. They'll look at you right in the face and smile the whole time that they plunge the knife through your chest. And we have to acknowledge that when we're dealing with that level of evil, it must mean that God is sort of equally, if not greater, in the light, right? Equally, if not greater, in the other side. And I know that that's sort of a cliche thing to remind everybody about, but it is sort of a powerful comfort in the process. And so when we've got a Secretary of State who shut down an investigation into pedophilia, whose foundation was rampantly involved in incredible amounts of criminality in Haiti, that foundation is actually indicted in a couple of different nations around the world for indicted in absentia for kidnapping and trafficking and things like that. Excuse me. And then we've got pictures like this that surface online. It helps to remind us that they like to hide in plain sight. They like to pretend that they're sort of on our side, right? We have to be wary of a lot of that. The good book says to be shrewd as serpents, right? And to be wise and to be, to listen to our heart and really be still and to know that what God is telling us, in order to do that, we have to sort of find a way to be calm in our spirit and really connect with God. And that's one of the things that in this journey, I think is worth remembering, because it is individuals like this and Joe Biden with his nose in different people, and, Obama with suggestive poses and holding individuals, and Pope Francis with his hands over young children's genitalia and things like that. We have to acknowledge that these people are very arrogant, and they are very good at pretending to ingratiate themselves with us on any side, right, left, right, center. It doesn't matter. They try to pick a side and use it to divide us. But their behaviors, their symbolisms, the things that they sort of don't say, right, the different messages that they send, the gestures that they make, that's how we read them. That's how we find out who they really are.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things that's in the news right now, of course, is the struggles and conflict going on in the Middle East. And you had some fascinating data that you shared on one of your last audio file that you released just a few days ago. And if that's okay, I would like to delve into one of those aspects. You mentioned a document that had surfaced in London relating to the state of Israel. And you mentioned earlier, of course, that many countries had been incorporated in order to cede the control of the country, its laws, government, other things, in many cases to other powers. And so you noted a way of looking up a particular document in London that was crafted earlier this year. I took the liberty of doing that, and here's what we found. You had said, go ahead and search Google for a document OE 027515, and lo and behold, in London, here comes an incorporation document for the state of Israel. The confounding thing is This was crafted in February of this year. The state of Israel has existed since its creation on the world stage back in the 40s. So maybe if you can take a few minutes and expand on what your theory is and thinking around why this got created.
Well, this is a tenuous issue, right? Because it sort of requires evangelical America to step back a little bit and realize that we have different layers of reality at play in the world. We have lived here in the United States of America for the better part of 150 plus years, thinking that we were living in a free and fair, republic, that we really had a say in everything, that our government was working sort of on our behalf. And the reason for so much stifling degradation of our society was this hemming and hawing back and forth across party lines, right? And none of that was actually really true. The Act of 1871, for example, usurped the Republic of the United States, took away the sovereignty of the citizenry and of the peoples of the United States, right? Incorporated the whole of the territories of the United States as essentially a giant business entity with the president as the CEO, right? It's no different than the corporation McDonald's. And so what occurred with that is when that happened, then we had the financial takeover begin, which was completed in 1913 with the ceding of U.S. financial control in its entirety to a private central banking system that we've now connected empirically to the Rothschild dynasty and several other big finance names over the last 100 years. So when we talk about the state of Israel, and we're talking about the incorporation of the state of Israel, what we're really talking about is in February of this year, the independent government of the Israeli state was made a business entity subservient to someone. And when we trace where the correspondence for this new company is supposed to go and where it's registered, right, we find the Israeli embassy in London, which happens to be essentially on the same property as Kensington Palace. So we know then that this is going to come back, right, to the British Crown, which has made an absolute expert practice of expanding its imperialism through the financial space when the militarism was not going to succeed, right? They weren't going to militarily take over the United States of America after the revolution of the late 18th century. We had too many weapons, we had too many guns, and quite frankly, they were too busy in Europe post the Napoleon years trying to consolidate control, right? And so what happens in the late 19th century is instead of taking over America, or the mid 19th century, is instead of taking over America militarily, they take over America bureaucratically and financially. They bankrupt the country by spawning off the Civil War, and then they usurped the sovereignty, the sovereign government. And so that has occurred in Israel this year. So the question then becomes, why? Why would that happen? Why would that occur this year? And why was the Israeli government notified that they would benefit from this arrangement at some point in the future on April 14, 1948? So that tells me that this was a longitudinal plan, right? This was sort of going right along in line with the 10 empirical nation states around the world, and the different, global totalitarian sort of super state at the behest of the UN and the one world government divided into 10 provincial areas, which would have been primarily the continents, right? And a little bit of division on them. This was their plan. And so Israel was always going to come into the fold, but it was going to come into the fold more towards the last because the locus of control in the military intelligence community is primarily based out of the Israeli Mossad and their relationship with the US CIA, the mafia that is hidden in Switzerland, which is primarily subservient to the WHO and the WEF and the UN at large. So the incorporation of the state of Israel, if we think about it from sort of an irregular lens, and that's what's occurring in the world right now, is this competing situation where multiple realities are at play, and thus it is irregular. If we consider it that way, then we have to consider that the bankrupting of that crown system, which President Trump initiated during the Trump presidency by bankrupting the U.S. corporation government, which brought down the entire system because it was such a large loss, right? It was akin to losing 90% of your stock market overnight in the banking sense. I'm not a financial advisor, but it's a metaphor I try to go with. Mm-hmm. The collapsing of that system is obviously a good thing on its face when we appreciate what that system has been able to do to the world and to humanity. And bringing Israel now underneath that umbrella at a government level, right, at a nation state level, will force the bankrupting of any deep state control of any contractual agreements that exist, right? Because all contractual agreements in a business space are null and void upon the bankrupting of the company, right? And so this is actually a good thing, in my own estimation. But unfortunately, that process in Israel has proven to be volatile, to say the least.
Yep. So you started by saying these are challenging concepts for many to even conceive of, and they seem to some perhaps to be, oh gosh, this is somehow an argument against, the notion of Judaism or in fact even Christianity or something else. That's not this observation. This is about the economic and contractual and corporate structure that ultimately, in previous sessions you've explained, has to change in order for us to return to proper sovereignty in countries around the world. That's a fair statement? Yeah.
Correct. In the
Yeah.
same fashion that here in the United States, we know that Joe Biden stole that election and is not our legitimate leader. And we have had calls from all levels of our society, right up to the federal government and down to the local citizen journalist level, for his resignation and for formal investigations into the corruption. The same behavior exists in the Israeli We the People as it pertains to the Likud government. Say what you want about Bibi Netanyahu, but he has lost a lot of the public favor over there in recent years because of the actions of the Israeli government over the last 36 months. They've essentially tried to suspend and rig the judiciary publicly. The public over there is not stupid by any means, and they recognize what is going on. A lot of them recognize that the intelligence failure that happened as it pertains to the current conflict on the side of the Mossad was sort of 1,000,000,000 to 1 odds, and it doesn't really pass the smell test. So there are calls right now for Netanyahu's resignation and some sort of accountability in their government. And it's because their government and all of our governments were made subservient to a different entity. They genuinely do not work for us.
Yeah, I think it was just this morning or perhaps yesterday that Charlie Kirk was on a show talking about, there's definitely confusion and some level of concern about the information that's been given to the world so far about how this began, how the conflict began, who's doing what, who has done what. And he was very careful to not indict any one particular party, but said, these certainly are logical areas for continued question. And I think that's true here too, that no matter how difficult or how concerning some of these things are, it's going back to, hey, it's our responsibility to look logically, discern the facts, research the facts where necessary, and then draw our conclusions. I also want to remind people that I think it was on our show with you last time, SG, we showed Dr. Jen Helper Hayes talking about one of the things you mentioned just a few minutes ago, the Act of 1871, in which the U.S. moved from being a pure republic to essentially an incorporated entity. And you can see that through a change in the name of the Constitution. You can see it in the change in the way the United States of America is even written. And so these are not imaginary things. These are based in things we can see, feel, research, and touch even today. So I think as we go forward, and I think I've heard you say this too, these are going to get to be more challenging questions, but you can't be afraid of them. You have to go in and do your work, do your homework, and determine what you find, consider it, and then make your conclusions.
Absolutely. I mean, the discernment portion, the intuition portion, the ability to absorb many different layers and many different angles from many different perspectives and allow that to congeal and inform a much greater and, quite frankly, much more satisfying conclusion. That's part of, I think, this entire awakening that everyone is on. And the gravity of how much our world has been obfuscated and shielded from us sort of provides some excuse me, passion fire to that process, because then it becomes how can I apply my newfound awareness in the best way possible, right? And that comes back to getting connected with God and realizing that we're spiritual beings. The Holy Spirit sustains every cell in our body. We have a very personal, deep, loving connection to the creator of all things. And these people, because of the types of practices that they participate in that we highlighted earlier, to the greatest degree possible, they sort of choke that connection off. And so they lose a lot of that comfort, that peace, that security, that knowing that they are, loved and a part of a greater whole, and feeling like they're part of a team and a community and a much greater whole. It's truly not possible for them anymore because of the types of areas that they take their sort of spiritual body, if you will, if we can use that terminology. And so, excuse me. So as we realize how to interpret and intuit all of these things, and how to reconnect with discernment and bring multiple layers of the truth to the world, everything changes. The legal landscape changes, the financial landscape changes, the healthcare landscape changes, because of not only the things that we do not want, but because the things that we do not want are so clearly presented to us now in such a very astute, interpretable fashion that we can very easily decide what we want as an alternative, and then use that God-given connection that we have to move ourselves into action, to have faith that a vision that we have for the world can come to pass, right? And we move ourselves forward towards that in a way that is purposeful and sort of deliberate, right? A lot of people out there would be very familiar with the feeling of sort of going to work to live and living to work, right? And making sure that everything was accounted for and taken care of. But it was sort of like life was on autopilot, and it wasn't very satisfying, and it certainly didn't provide a good depth or meaning. So something like this is deliberate, and it has momentum and inspiration to it. And it, despite the tragedy and despite some of the uncertainty and the fearfulness out there, it can actually be a beautiful and wonderful and awesome time as well.
It can. It's perhaps notable that, at least in my experience, we've seen folks that might have been perhaps not faith-based as much in the past, and all of a sudden, for reasons that nobody but they themselves can explain, they seem drawn. They've reported feelings seeming drawn toward a need for faith, a yearning, if you will, for faith. And this is not just in one particular religious direction. It's a greater thing. It seems to be, and folks that if they felt like they were taken in by some of the events in the past couple of years, that evolution of a feeling of need seems to have really accelerated, and I find that very very promising and very hopeful as we go forward. So since our last show, I could tell from the response that folks are really interested in hearing your thoughts on a regular basis, SG, and being able to follow you. So let's refresh folks where they can find your work on an ongoing basis, shall we?
Absolutely. As of this recording, I'm present online in 2 places. I'm on Truth Social at the handle Real SGAnon with a red verified check mark. And then I'm on rumble.com/user/QNewsPatriot. I'm not on Rumble by SGAnon. Here to be soon, I'm attempting to iron out details for a 3rd permanent home, but that is as yet undecided. And so the 2 that you have on the screen are the only 2 that people can find me authentically right now.
Okay, that's great. Once again, thank you so much for devoting the time to us. I know that specifically our audience is in that learning phase that's so important as we get into these next stages. So I bet a lot of folks will be following you directly, and we'll look forward to hopefully having you on with us again soon. And you're always welcome to join if you have things that you believe need to get out quickly. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn, and thank you for having me. Have a great evening.
All right, you too.